Welcome to Back to School, a podcast where two highly opinionated design system consultants put aside their deep set assumptions to dive deep on design systems topics. Climb aboard the school bus for a field trip on the history, the lessons, and the people that really make design systems truly great. So that's what this is all about. I don't know if Luke mentioned this, but I'm going to. You can very much ask questions in the chat as we're going through. If you want to, we'll do our best to answer them. And other than that, I think we can get started.
Yeah, sounds good. I was keen to go back to design systems school. I feel like I have a lot of very preconceived ideas. You mentioned certain things to me in systems and I roll my eyes and I'm totally dismissive. So we thought this podcast could provide a great opportunity to, take a fresh look at stuff and stop being so blooming opinionated.
Absolutely. We kind of talked about it, didn't we? And said probably the last thing the world needs is more design system punditry. So we would try and come at it afresh and put our opinions aside and look at things from a kind of back to basics point of view. And actually, the first topic that we're looking at, so this week's topic, we're talking about how can AI write design systems docs? And that was a really interesting one to put that concept to the challenge for me, because I have lots of opinions about AI being used to write design systems documentation, not all of them positive. And so I had to work quite hard to put that aside this week. So the format for these podcasts, by the way, I should maybe mention, is we're going to take it in turns to become the teacher each week. So this week it's my turn to be the teacher. So my question for you, Geri, is how much do you know about AI?
Probably about as much as the average person working in design systems. I don't feel like I've gone out of my way to embrace it or shy away from it. For full disclosure, I do pay for Chat GPT, and I use it several times a day to make myself look clever or funny. As you can see, it's not really working. The first thing I did, though, as soon as I got it, was ask me to write design system documentation to see if it was any good. So is this something that you've done previously? I know you wanted to research this topic because you said you didn't know much about it. Is this not something you immediately leapt on?
I've dabbled and then I dabbled back out again. So that's pretty much my relationship with it. Should say other AI documentation providers are available. But yes, we are, of course, going to be talking a lot about ChatGPT today. And on that note, I thought something that would be an interesting test to kind of kick off the episode is I asked ChatGPT to write introductions for us. So we've introduced ourselves. So you've heard the real spiel about who we are and what we do and what on earth we're talking about. Would you like to now hear, Geri, how ChatGPT describes us?
I'd be interested in knowing, I mean, we both have websites that have probably been around for a while. I'd be amazed if it actually knows who we are. We're not actually that famous outside of maybe the 100 people that do design systems. So yeah, go on, hit me with it.
Well, I would say it's, just to kind of set your expectations, I would say it's stretching the truth in a flattering way. So I think we're onto something here. So the headline it's given us is Meet Your Dynamic Duo of Design Systems, Amy Hupe and Geri Reid, which I like. Get ready to be inspired by the dynamic duo at the helm of our podcast. Introducing Amy Hupe and Geri Reid, two seasoned design systems consultants with a shared passion for transforming digital experiences through systematic design. Amy Hupe, with a background deeply rooted in user-centered design and a knack for crafting elegant solutions. Elegance is not necessarily a word I associate with myself very often, but I'm very happy to be called it by ChatGPT. Amy brings a wealth of experience to the table. Her keen eye for detail and commitment to excellence have earned her accolades in the industry. Now, I'm not aware of those accolades, but I am very excited to hear that they exist, making her a trusted advisor for organizations seeking to elevate their design practices. Now for you, Geri, armed with a fusion of graphics arts expertise and technical prowess, Geri is a force to be reckoned with in the world of design systems. Her ability to bridge the gap between creativity and technology has enabled her to spearhead successful design initiatives across diverse platforms and industries. Thoughts and feelings, Geri?
It's all very vague. It's like when you get one of those horoscopes that covers all the people who are in your star sign, and you can just pull out of it the bits that relate to you. So yeah, I'm loving it though.
You like
Yeah,
it? Yeah, I like it
here
too.
from the fusion of graphic arts expertise and technical prowess, I'm here for. So it's all
Technical
good.
prowess is great. I really would be happy with that. Yeah. So then together, Amy and Geri form a formidable team, united by their shared vision of empowering designers and organizations to harness the full potential of design systems with a blend of insightful commentary, practical advice, and infectious enthusiasm. They're here to guide you on a transformative journey through the fascinating realm of design systems. So buckle up and prepare to be inspired as Amy and Geri take you on a captivating exploration of design systems in our podcast. Welcome to the adventure.
Wow, I feel like that's probably going to be the best bit of our entire podcast over all the episodes we do. That's incredible. If I can live up to any of those accolades, then I'm knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, start as you mean to go on and inevitably go downhill from there. That's my motto in life. So we're going to start off, Geri, with a history lesson about AI. And I should say we're talking about AI here today, but really we're talking about LLMs, which stands for large language models. So LLMs are AI systems used to model and process human language. And the name that we most often associate with LLMs is OpenAI's ChatGPT. So we've already talked about that today. It's important to note, this is a very important point, that ChatGPT itself is not an LLM, but it's an application that's developed on top of an LLM, which is called GPT, hence ChatGPT. So the first modern LLMs were created right after the development of things called transformers, which I believe stands for transformer or transforming neural networks. You can tell that I've really researched this to death. And probably the most significant examples are which I think is the Google one, ChatGPT as well, or GPT, beg your pardon. And the first LLM was developed by Google, and it was proposed in a paper in 2017, which was called something to do with attention. Attention is all you need. So that was in 2017. But then from kind of 2020, that's where things really started to take off. So that's when we started to hear a lot about kind of mainstream LLMs. And they became, between 2020 and now, which is in kind of the grand scheme of things, quite a short space of time, the capacity and the ability of them grew exponentially. So to begin with, they were dealing with maybe, 1 million parameters, which were the things that they referenced to kind of do their magic. And now we're talking in the kind of billions and trillions. So I've shared a little graph in our research notes, which nobody in this chat can hear, but maybe you could have a look at the graph and just describe it for our lovely listeners and viewers.
Okay, let me enlarge your graph, Amy. I didn't realize this was going to be interactive. Let's have a look. Yeah. It's called the rise and rise of AI large language models. Goodness me, there's loads of them. I guess we only know kind of ChatGPT, and we're up to kind of GPT-4 or 4 point whatever it is, but it looks like there's a load of them. It's interesting. It's kind of something that only came on my radar with ChatGPT, and it took me a while to kind of, ChatGPT is just, it's just not a name that works. I mean, why did they call it that? It just seems like a real mouthful, and it's not that memorable. It's only memorable because I've said it so many times. But yeah, there's obviously quite a lot of LLMs out there that we just don't know about. Oh, someone said developer naming conventions in the chat. Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
When you get in, sorry to any engineers on the call, but when engineers name stuff.
Yeah. Some engineers can name things intuitively. Often it's intuitive for engineers, though, which I think
exactly that's it. Yeah,
it's the tricky old thing. But did you know that ChatGPT, just a few months after its release, became the fastest growing digital application of all time?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, isn't it? It kind of burst on the scene, and I guess we were just blown away with it. It's kind of like this magical thing that just does stuff for you, which we've never had before. And it almost feels like you're talking to a real person sometimes.
I am determinedly ignoring it. Like I'm just pretending that it's not there, and it's not realistic. Luke compared me to somebody who clung to their kind of archaic farming tools when the Industrial Revolution came along the other day, which I think is probably a fair assessment of how I'm approaching ChatGPT. But yes, it was actually very interesting to kind of dig into it this week and find out a bit more about the history of it and how it all works and stuff. Do you want to know a little bit?
Can I ask
Go
you a
on.
question though? Just
Yes.
on that, what would make you start using it? Like, what would it have to offer you for you to get on board?
I think honestly, it's just going to become unavoidable. I don't think that it's going to be any particular feature or anything that it. I mean, I think it's pretty cool. Like what it can do, it's quite cool. There are limitations to it, which we'll talk about a bit later on. But it's not that it's lacking ability. It's more, I guess, concerns like ethical concerns that I have around it is, the impact on our jobs, things like that. And a general kind of mistrust of. I'm one of those people that's very allergic to new technology, which is interesting considering I work in tech, but I'm very avoidant of it until it becomes, completely spoon feedable to me. So I suppose it's more about me than it is ChatGPT in some respects.
I think when it's baked into stuff and you use it without realizing it, then it will become cool. Like we had like a 24-hour power cut here the other day, and of course you have no electricity, you have no
Yeah.
Wi-Fi, but you have no electricity, and it makes you sort of realize how important electricity is. Like you don't think, oh, I'm activating the electricity. You just turn on the light and everything in the house works. I think when these sort of LLMs power stuff and they're helping you to do things more efficiently without you really realizing you're using them, maybe that's when you'll get on board.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe when it becomes completely ubiquitous, which I don't think we're that far away from, to be quite honest. So, and thinking about kind of AI in general, I watched a really good talk about AI and kind of LLMs and things by somebody called Maggie Appleton. I definitely recommend reading about kind of going through some of her articles and things if you're interested in this subject. And she was saying that, back in the day, calculator was considered AI. So a lot of the, we talk about it like it's a new thing. And we are obviously in a big hype cycle at the moment around LLM specifically, but AI itself is not a kind of new concept. And I'm sure at some point it will seem less intimidating and overwhelming. So someone called me a Luddite. Was that Luke? Yes, it was. Luke, you're going to fail your own code of conduct. Honestly, just get out. Okay. So, Geri, would you like to take a little field trip now?
I would love to go on a school field trip as we're going back to school. Amy, where are you taking me?
Great. Well, I will say that like most school field trips, it's going to be lots of promise, quite underwhelming in reality, and somebody's probably going to vomit at the back of the school bus. But I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of try to get a sense of what's going on in the industry. So how are people actually using this in their work? And coincidentally, as Luke mentioned, Zero Height have just released their annual How We Document survey, which is a survey to look at kind of team practices and documentation processes around design systems. And according to that, 62% of respondents said that their team hasn't yet tried creating documentation using AI, which I was quite surprised by. I thought it'd be a lower number than that. But 62% of us are in the Luddite camp, like me. So I was quite chuffed with that. 19% of respondents said that they have experimented with AI. So they're what I'm calling AI curious, but they haven't yet moved over fully into the kind of AI camp. 11% are using it. 7% said they're not sure whether they're using it, which I kind of love. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean? You think maybe it's like you're not using it, but you suspect that like Derek over in the developer team might be using it for some of his stuff. I don't know what that means, but I really like it. And then 1% said other, and I don't have access to the verbatim responses that went with other, so I'm not sure what that means either. But 8% of people don't know what they're doing, and good for them. And the rest of them, the vast majority, are not yet using it for design system documentation. What do you make of that?
I wonder if I guess it's what you infer from the question, like, is your tool magically hooked up and, you know, pulling from an LLM. I know, you know, Zero Height has that capability. You know, there's lots of things being developed like that, which I mean, are these people sort of going away independently and looking at it for docs? I don't know. It does seem like a lower number than I would have expected. I would have thought more people would jump on board with it, just out of curiosity, really.
Maybe people are lying. Maybe it's like people getting ChatGPT to write their homework for them and then saying that they wrote it themselves. Perhaps that's what's going on here. Do we think?
Yeah, maybe. Interesting.
Yeah, and I asked. I did also put out a tweet, or whatever the hell it's called now, on x.com, to thanks Elon, to ask about how people are using it in their day-to-day work. And I reckon about 3 people came back to me saying that they have experimented with it, but nobody was kind of saying, yes, we use it extensively and regularly. I think it's kind of people running experiments with it at the moment, and for whatever reason kind of concluding it's not quite where it needs to be just now to really take on that role, which as a kind of technical writer half the time I'm pretty pleased to hear, because it means I still have a job for now. I actually don't have a job right now. I don't know if I'm allowed to plug that, but by all means do hire me if you want to work with this. So Geri, that was our field trip, short and sweet. We're going to move on to the kind of the bulk of the lesson now, which is more of a what I've called a science lesson. How do you feel about science? Were you any good at science at school?
Hopeless. I'm just all over the humanities, you know, art, design. I can write things, just hopeless at science. So I hope there's not going to be a test.
No, well, maybe a surprise test at the end. Yes, I mean, with your kind of graphical art expertise, the signs were there. Well, anyway, Geri, I'm going to subject you to a science lesson. So we're going to talk a little bit about how it works, and then we're going to run an experiment in the science lab. So the underlying technology of LLMs, as I mentioned before, is called a transformer neural network, which we just call transformers. Those of us who know what we're talking about, we just call them transformers, just for short. And using these transformers, so LLMs generate content, and they use these enormous bodies of text, of data, but text in the case of large language models taken from the internet. And they use these data sets to analyze and learn the linguistic relationship between different words. And that's what they use to then generate responses to the prompts that we give to them, the human written prompts. So when we're asking ChatGPT a question, it's kind of starting to provide the answer, and then it's looking bidirectionally at the words and how they map to the words before and after them. And that's how it's kind of that's how it's generating the text. It is a bit obscure. So they're often referred to as kind of black box models, because it's very unclear how they actually kind of work under the hood. And there is a call for kind of more transparency around that from, for the creators of these technologies. But for now, we can't solve that mystery, and nor do I wish to try. So we're just going to take it at face value and ask it to do something for us. So I asked ChatGPT to write me some documentation for a good old button component. And I didn't give it very much to go on, in fairness to it. I kind of set it up for a fail here, but I said, write me some design system documentation for a button component. So as you'd expect, I got something fairly generic. I'm not going to sit and read it all here because I don't think that'll be very interesting listening for anyone. But something that I did do is I got a friend and former colleague of mine, Hayden Pickering, who some of you might know. He's I don't even know how to describe him, developer, designer, accessibility specialist, very funny man. Definitely knows what he's talking about, to take a look at the documentation that it wrote. And just to kind of give you a flavor, I think the first comment that I saw pop up from him was nothing sentence. And then another one from him saying, where did it go? Oh, there was I now can't see it. Oh, it's for, so ChatGPT said, use appropriate contrast ratios for button text and background colors to ensure readability. And Hayden's response was, it's for legibility, you robot fool. So just a really good plethora of comments there. But it's kind of interesting to me what it came up with. Like, it's made some quite big assumptions here. So it's assumed that we're using React to create the button. It's provided an example of code which uses React. It does seem to be kind of over explaining. I know you've had a look at this too, Geri. I don't know if you thought the same thing, but it seems to be saying some fairly obvious and redundant things, like use buttons consistently throughout your application for predictable user experience. It says it kind of keeps telling people to follow the guidelines, which, you would hope that is their intention if they're reading them.
I think it's just really kind of generic stuff. Like, if I'd say, what are the accessibility considerations of something like a component, I'm looking for the kind of granular, it needs this ARIA attribute, use it in this scenario sort of thing. But it will give me all of the accessibility criteria, like make sure the text has a, contrast ratio, and make sure all these things which you kind of already know, but you aren't actually specific to a button component or whatever component you're looking at.
Yeah.
It is interesting, actually. I've had a quick flick through. There's a few sort of glaring errors in there, like, it says buttons are used for navigating to different pages, but it's obviously a link. A button shouldn't be used for navigation. You use a button to perform an action, like submit a form. So, the problem with things like this is you have to know that in order to be able to troubleshoot it, or to be able to correct it. You need to have enough specialist knowledge to know that. Otherwise, kind of worryingly, you could just put this on your doc site.
Yeah. I think that was kind of my main takeaways. You really do need to have a kind of critical eye. This technology, as it stands right now, is not going to replace skilled people. Like, you could not give this to a kind of person that doesn't have this sort of expertise or an understanding of this area, and just get them to generate some documentation and then just correct it for grammar and things. Like, it's clear that you still need to look at this with a fairly critical eye. And to be fair, as I said, I gave it a very generic prompt there, so it's not that surprising that it's kind of thrown everything into the mix. Yeah.
It's quite a simple component, though, a button. So it's where this kind of comes unstuck even more, I find, if it's something that's not so run-of-the-mill. Like, I had an instance recently, it was some read-only form components. So HTML has a read-only attribute, ARIA has a read-only, but then they can't all be applied to all of the form components, and it got very confused. And the thing it specced out was just technically wrong. So things like that are kind of worrying if it's actually wrong. And then I've queried it and said, oh, is this correct? And then it would say, oh no, this is not correct, it should be done like this. So
yeah, and that's the kind of interesting thing for me, is there's almost sort of two categories of what I would think of as mistakes in this documentation. So there's what's kind of commonly called like AI hallucinations, where it's just saying things which are objectively wrong. And then in other cases, it's kind of just proliferating things that do happen and some people might consider correct but are not great. So you mentioned the example of it using it saying that use buttons to navigate to different pages, and some people style buttons as links and links as buttons, and that's the thing that happens. But a lot of people would argue that that's not good practice, and we know that it's not good in terms of material honesty and accessibility and things like that. So it is worrying that it's included guidance for things that we probably like people to avoid doing. Anyway, I thought I should probably give it a fairer shot. So then I tried giving it a more specific prompt. So I thought, let's narrow it down a bit. And I asked it to write me some usage guidance for a primary button component. And I asked it to cover kind of 4 points here. So I said, it should say that you should only have one primary button on a page, that buttons should trigger an action. It should say, do not use disable buttons, and do not style links as buttons. So that was me having a bit of a dig at what it had said before. I said, ensure that the guidance can be understood by developers, designers, and content designers with varying levels of technical experience. So you've seen the documentation that it produced this time round. Do you have any thoughts about it?
It's basically just pulled out all of your points and, based all of its assumptions off that.
Mm,
So the first spec it wrote with your very vague prompt is actually much more accurate. With this, it's given you headings like limit one primary button per page. Now, that is one little piece of guidance amongst button usage, but it's not going to be a heading.
mm.
So I feel like by being more specific, it's actually taken it down a strange path, and the guidance
Yeah.
is even less useful.
Yes, and it's done a slightly odd thing here. So as you say, what it's done is it's taken those prompts that I gave it, that kind of bullet list, and it's made each one of those a heading. So we've got limit to one primary button per page. Buttons should trigger an action. Avoid using disabled buttons and do not style links as buttons. And then it's sort of, because I think it feels like it's committed to this format now of these dividing everything up with these very aggressive headings. It's then just popped in at the end additional considerations, which is just this list of kind of 3 completely odd, random Brucey bonus pieces of guidance. So clarity and consistency, ensure that the text and labeling of primary buttons are clear, concise, and consistent throughout your application. Accessibility, verify that primary buttons adhere to accessibility standards, including keyboard navigation and proper focus states to ensure an inclusive user experience. I mean, I'd argue if you don't know how to do that, if you don't know that you should do that, you probably don't know how to do that, and that's probably not sufficient guidance for you to do that. And then responsiveness, so test primary buttons across various devices and screen sizes to ensure they remain usable and accessible on all platforms. I think it's got its heart's in the right place, but it doesn't really know what it's on about, does it? Doesn't really.
No,
A bit like
no.
me trying to talk about this subject, actually.
Yeah, it's like me trying to talk about something really technical in an engineering call where I actually don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm just kind of glossing over the details. It's got that kind of vibe to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Another kind of thing that I noticed that it did is that it in sort of making the guidance that I asked it to write its own, a little bit, it reminded me a little bit of like when I would write essays at university and I'd be sort of frantically trying to make sure it got through a plagiarism filter. Sorry to any of my lecturers if you're listening. So I'm kind of absolutely caning the thesaurus to try and come up with like different phrases. So it's just popped some alternative words in. But in some instances where it's done that, it's sort of lost the meaning. So I said, do not use disabled buttons. And it's reinterpreted that as avoid using disabled buttons. And I thought that was quite interesting because it really does soften that meaning. I want to tell people don't do this, and it's instead it's telling people try your best not to do this. And I think that's something to kind of look out for. It's like, is it losing the meaning? Is it kind of conveying what you actually want to say?
Yeah, I think Luke's got it on the head in the chat saying it's like a shit intern.
Yes, right. Shout out to interns.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Woo, go interns. You've really
go
helped me out
interns.
over the years.
Yeah.
Despite being a bit shit, right? A shit intern. We all start
Oh,
somewhere.
we do.
Yeah.
And I was that shit intern once.
Yeah, me too. Not that
Yeah.
long ago. Well, actually, it was probably like about 30 years ago for me. I guess the other thing with me is just where does this information come from? Like, because I said as I said, I pay for Chat GPT, and in doing that, you can sort of set up your own GPTs that you can feed with the documentation that you want it to reference. So like I'll feed it with like the design system sites that I rate, knowing that they're accessible, it's good quality copy, things like that, and that I agree with the way that they build stuff, a kind of gov.uk job. But with this, you sort of like, where does this information come from? Like it's not cited anywhere. It's all so general. That's kind of what worries me.
I would say that worries me too on kind of 2 fronts. Like one is the the accuracy and reliability of the information, because if you don't know what its sources are, then obviously there's a concern that it's referencing sources which are inaccurate or unreliable or biased in some way. And then I guess the other concern I have, which is perhaps more selfishly motivated, but is, as I've kind of mentioned, I'm somebody who writes this stuff for a living, right? So, and I've worked on some fairly well-known design systems and written documentation for them. So, as far as I am aware, this will be one of the data sources this is using is my work, and I'm not getting any attribution for that. I'm not getting any recognition for that. Certainly not getting any payment for that. So it's a kind of interesting challenge, I think, in this area, is like, how do we kind of keep this fair? And and of course, you know, a big thing that we're going to have to keep an eye out for, which is already starting to happen and is going to happen more and more, is that it will become self-referencing. You know, the more sort of generative AI is used and the more content that's created using LLMs that appears on the internet, the more it's going to be referencing itself. And I think Hayden, he did a video about this, describes it as a kind of incestuous pug loop, which watch the video for the context of that. I think that's probably going to get cut from the recording, but we'll shout out to the live folks who get the unfiltered version. So yeah, I think there are definitely some kind of risks here. So yeah, I wasn't overly impressed with the output. I will as well say in its defense that I could have written better prompts, and I also was using the free version of ChatGPT, where I didn't have the opportunity to kind of tell it which sources and stuff to reference. So I'm sure if I adjusted my approach, we could get it to do something better, but it wasn't enough personally to convince me that this is where we need it to be right now to perform this kind of task. I did think it would be interesting to kind of double up on my AI support here. And so I also then gave ChatGPT's output to a tool called Hemingway, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's another AI-based tool. But what it does is it analyzes your text and tells you how clear it is. It tells you whether you're writing in the active voice or the passive voice. It identifies sentences that could be simplified, and it comes up with an overall score and gives you some suggestions of how to improve it. So I got Hemingway to critique ChatGPT's efforts. I have to say I wasn't overly impressed with it. I don't know if you meant to kind of throw shade on ChatGPT. Maybe there's a bit of rivalry going on between them or something, but it rated ChatGPT's efforts at 9 out of, I didn't get a percentage, but it said that 9 out of 32 sentences were hard or very hard to read. It identified its 6 phrases where there were simpler alternatives and 2 passive voice sentences. So on the whole, this could be much simpler, was what I kind of took away from that.
I think it's good for, sort of key headings. Yeah, if you're writing something and you want to, especially if you're writing about something you don't have a huge knowledge or context on, what are the top 5 key points or the 5 things I should be thinking of? Like, I've sometimes used it for a structure for something, and every so often it will pop up with an idea which I haven't thought about, which is nice.
Yeah. It's sounding more and more like a shit intern, isn't it? It's like kind of, you're happy to accept that 8 out of 10 ideas might be crap. You're going to get the occasional good one just through law of averages.
That you can pass off as your own.
Nice. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's good. Yeah. I mean, one of the kind of, when I asked people on Twitter what they were using it for and stuff, that I think it was Henry Daggett mentioned that one of the uses that had proved to be quite helpful was getting it to simplify language. So if you give it something you've written, it can kind of condense that down and simplify something. And it's also quite good at shortening paragraphs of text. And I think that, that's definitely something we could make use of it for, given that, as we know, documentation is far too verbose and nobody likes to read or write it. So anything we can do to kind of cut it down might encourage people to actually read it.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of people using it for things like, when you start a new board game and no one can be bothered reading the rules, like, can you summarize the rules in 2 paragraphs? Because that's all anyone wants. So yeah.
Yeah.
Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. I sometimes say if it's something really technical and complicated.
Yeah. What's your, just a quick aside, what's your sort of board game personality? Are you a read the rules person, or are you a let's just start playing and see what happens person?
No, I was talking about this with someone this morning, just in terms of like onboarding. Like, we've made you this onboarding widget. It's like, I'm just going to literally close it as soon as I open the product, and then just poke around at everything trying to get it to work. And then if I can't get it to work, I'll go to their docs and try and, Google that, look for that one bit of information I need.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not a reader of instructions. Can't be bothered with any of that. I've got enough time. How about you?
A bit of both. It really depends on what it is and how much I actually want to engage with the task, I think. Yeah, I'm quite bad at just trying to bypass instructions, but often find myself having to go back to them and stuff. So that's I'm trying to get back into my GitHub account at the moment. I've managed to lock myself out quite significantly. And every time I open the documentation that explains how to do it, I'm just like, absolutely not. This is the length of the Bible, and I just want the bit that I want. So yeah, I do share that impatience, I think, around instructions and things. But I like to pretend it doesn't exist when I'm writing documentation. I always think mine's very clear and intuitive.
Well, I do think the sort of just enough documentation approach is the way to go, because,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes design systems, and I know I've been guilty of this, it just becomes this huge monolith of documentation to get on board with. And you sort of see it through the eyes of a new starter, and they haven't got time to read all of this and get on board with their product job. You know, they just want something that they can use that works for them and, you know, solves their problems. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think minimize the docs. That's the way I've been going.
Absolutely. I mean, sorry, we are going a bit off topic now, but I just think
Mm.
it's worth mentioning because it's kind of an interesting thing to look at here. There is a framework called the diataxis framework, which is something that's used in the kind of technical writing community. And it basically divides up documentation into 4 different types, which I'm not going to be able to recite off the top of my head, but it's something like tutorial, explanation, how-to guides, and one other that I can't remember. But the point about it is that you have to consider what the role of your documentation is and what the people reading it are expecting to do. And I think where we sometimes go wrong with design system documentation is that we try to combine explanation documentation with like a how-to guide. And actually, if you're there for quick instructions on how to install the component, you probably don't want a lengthy description of like how the component came into existence and which team designed it and like all the research that went into it and stuff. Like there's definitely a place for that, but I think it's about structuring your documentation and kind of keeping those things helpfully separate. So yeah, I just thought I would mention that. I think it's something that's worth considering to make documentation more readable. So yes, the kind of lessons learned, just summarizing all of that, I guess, is, I mean, I guess my main takeaway at this point is that I think that using AI to create design system documentation is kind of solving the least bad problem we have when writing it, which is actually writing it. Like that, when I think about the main issues that I see in documentation and how those issues have been created, it's usually a lack of kind of planning and scoping, and it's then not knowing how to edit that documentation, how to kind of refine it and distill it down to what you really need. And at the moment, AI doesn't solve those problems for you. It does that bit in the middle. And we still have to do the kind of planning, scoping, writing good prompts, you know, and then we have to do an edit at the end. We have to fact check it. We have to make sure that it's in keeping with our in-house style and grammatical conventions. We have to make sure that it's tonally right. We have to check that it, you know, hasn't included a load of superfluous information. So for me at the moment, it's kind of solving the easiest problem. Still a problem, but like not the hardest bit, I would say. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the technical specification bit and getting that right is the difficult bit. You know, writing the docs is pretty quick once you have a good spec in place. I almost feel like the docs write themselves. So, yeah, as you say, it's doing the bit that we probably don't need that much help with at the moment.
Yeah. Although I guess I would say it may be the bit that people feel they need most help with. Like when I talk to people about kind of their confidence in writing, whether that's writing guidance or other content or documentation, you know, people lack confidence a lot of the time when it comes to writing if that's not part of their job or it's not the main point of their job. So it might be that it's kind of helping people to at least get to a start point with that so that they can then kind of, you know, if they're more confident editing, then it at least gives them something to begin with, I guess. One other thing that I want to mention, and then we'll do a little closing assembly, is that Zero Height, this is not, they've not paid me to say this particular bit, but they have Michelle Chin, who works for Zero Height, wrote a really helpful blog post about using AI kind of responsibly to help with design system documentation. And she introduced this framework, which I don't know how you say this acronym, so I'm just going to spell it out, but CIGO, which stands for content. So who's it for? What's the end result? Information. So what information does it need to communicate? Goal. So what does the reader need to know or do by the end of having read it? And output. So what format should the output take? And so, do we want a list? Do we want a paragraph? What kind of thing? And that she kind of suggests using that as a way to just write better prompts so that you'll get something closer to the outcome that you're aiming for, which I think is useful. I think if you are going to use this to create your documentation, then it's probably good to have, a repeatable framework for producing that documentation.
I think the who is it for bit is the most important for me. A lot of the time we've sort of produced these screeds of documentation and we go to the engineers and they're like, we literally just want a props table and a storybook with a component in it. So yeah, I think it's who is this for. If it's, for UX designers who are using the component, then you might want a bit more information. But if it's engineers, they're possibly looking for something else. So yeah, who's it for is really crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings us, Geri, to our closing assembly, where we're just I just thought I'd kind of talk about, like, to finish us off, and perhaps we can both talk about this a bit, is the opportunities that I see with this and the current risks. And spoiler alert, I couldn't completely keep my opinion out of this. There are more risks than opportunities as I see it right now. But, risks that I think can be managed and mitigated, not reasons not to use it and not to do it, just things that we need to think about. Opportunities wise, I think clearly efficiency. So it does take some of the legwork out of that actual writing bit of documentation. Speed, I mentioned, I think you can definitely get a first draft of some documentation together more quickly and test it with real people quicker than you can with human written documentation. And comprehensiveness. So it did include a lot of nonsense additions that I didn't really want or care about, but to give it its due, it did mention a couple of things that I hadn't thought to mention, which probably are worth saying. So I think, as you say, like the intern, it may give you the odd good idea that hadn't occurred to you that you can then kind of pass off as your own. So that's potentially useful. Is there anything else you think when you think about opportunities for?
Yeah, I guess the opportunities for me is just doing a load of stuff at speed, and I find it helps me out for Spitty ChatGPT helps me out for things like if I've got loads of data to format, if I've got a load of JSON to pick something out of, it's really useful for just crunching stuff that is like a manual job that would take me a long time to do. Or if your docs are in markdown tables, it will put it into a markdown view, things like that. So yeah, just the kind of speed and efficiency thing for me is probably the most useful at the moment, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. And as design system specialists, we are always thinking about speed and efficiency. So yeah, then risk wise, I think I mentioned this kind of lack of transparency around the technology and how it works. And I think that's really important for accountability. And I am thinking more broadly than just design system documentation here, but I think we have to know more about what sources this is referencing, how it's working, how things are being kept accurate. Like it seems like they're not at the moment. How are they working towards improving the accuracy of it? There's definitely, this is kind of pushing us even more into this monopoly. It's a very small number of companies developing these technologies, which are quickly becoming very ubiquitous in our day-to-day work. And that's definitely going to have kind of impact on wealth distribution and things, which is not great news. We talked about the lack of attribution. So I think the fact that LLMs are trained on existing design system documentation, I mentioned that as a person whose job it is to do that, I feel weird about that. It's definitely going to have an impact on the job market. I think I've kind of poo-pooed this a bit when people say, I'm like, oh, this isn't going to replace skilled humans. But I think it's going to change the nature of our jobs at the very least. And I certainly think there'll be companies in the meantime that think, oh, I can just, replace that junior writer with, or, designer, whoever it is, with an AI, and that I don't believe that's the case right now. But I think that we'll see people attempting to do that, and I think that our role is going to become different in light of this technology as it gets better. It may be that we're more about kind of quality control and things than we are about actually producing stuff. I don't know. Imperfect source material, I mean, like, no disrespect, but I think a lot of design system documentation is lacking. It's often very variable in terms of quality. It's often written by people who are not experts in writing documentation, and that is a specialism. People talk about how no one reads documentation, and I tend to think that that's actually a symptom of the documentation not being very good. It's often kind of too verbose, it's poorly structured, it's not clear. And so the point I'm making, I guess, is we're starting with what I consider a fairly flawed set of data here. And LLMs are, as they're kind of used to generate more documentation, we're only going to see those problems being proliferated and increasing. And, I talked about self-referencing as it starts to become more self-referencing, how that's going to be exponential, and inaccuracy. Some of this is just going to be garbage nonsense. And, if you don't know what you're talking about, then you might struggle to spot that. Like if I got it to write me an essay on, I don't know, mating rituals of capybaras, I probably wouldn't know what was true and what wasn't. I don't know where that came from. It popped into my head. I think about
the recesses of your mind, woman, honestly.
I think about capybaras in my Roman Empire. I think about them about 500 times a day. I don't know why. I just really like those little guys. Whacking great hamsters, my dad calls them. And I like that. Anything I haven't mentioned that you think of as a risk?
No, I mean, I know you did a podcast called Series of Harm, which sort of demonstrates the risk of a garbage in, garbage out thing. So, if the design system docs are of not particularly good quality, and then, they're being replicated and then sort of used again and again and again, it kind of dilutes it even more. I think we will always need human specialists to read these things. I mean, they're using AI to do things like, write alt tags or, infer from the image what is in the image. And, I'm sure it gets it right a lot of the time, but not all of the time. So, you're always going to need a human, I think, to review these things, or be happy with it just being rubbish, one or the other.
One or the other, indeed. Hopefully people will opt for the human. Right, Geri, that brings us to the end of our lesson. How do you feel about a very quick pop quiz?
No.
You mentioned how much you love spontaneous quizzes, so I thought you'd really.
I love quizzes. I love spontaneity.
Everything you love in one go.
All boxes. Okay, go on, hit me with it.
Now, Geri, I want you to look away from the research notes which you have access to. Okay, number 1. What year was the transformer neural network first proposed?
2017.
Correct. Well done. Yes. What is the name of the most well-known large language model?
Oh, it had something like adventures and something. Oh, the largest, as ChatGPT. I don't know. I feel like my logic's fallen down here.
Is ChatGPT your answer?
Oh, go on.
That was actually a trick question, Geri, because as I mentioned at the beginning, ChatGPT itself is not
a large language model. Oh, okay.
So it is in fact GPT. But good try. I'll give you half a point.
Set up to fail on that one. Yeah, thanks for that.
Final one. What percentage of teams have not yet tried using AI to create their design system documentation according to the Zero Height Howie document survey? Is it A? 62%.
No, 62%.
Oh. Geri! Okay, well, 2.5 out of 3.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
On the whole, based on that and your contribution to this episode, I'm going to give you a B+.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Thanks for doing the homework this time round. I feel like you've knocked it out of the park. I think I'd give you a solid A for effort and a special commendation for such a detailed bibliography.
An A for effort and a C for execution.